Next, let us continue our in-depth study of the profound wisdom found within Confucius's Analects. The Analects may not have much to do with liberation. There's not a strong connection, but if we study this text well, it should be helpful in handling affairs and interpersonal relationships. It should be beneficial. So as Buddhists, sometimes just studying the 5 great treatises and the tantric scriptures may not be enough. After all, we live in this world. In this way, we can understand many principles. This is still very important. So now basically we set aside one dedicated class period each and every week to talk to everyone about the profound Analects of Confucius. The Analects is now considered part of traditional Chinese culture and is also highly valued around the world. So in the future, during the process of spreading the Dharma and benefiting sentient beings, this might also be necessary. For example, if I talk about something else, when I communicate with everyone, I use methods based mainly on the Analects as a skillful means, and then explain things to others, which might prove to be quite useful and beneficial. So for this particular time, we are mainly discussing the profound wisdom found within the Analects as well. This is primarily because it was in the year 2019 when, or maybe a bit earlier, that we started this. There were a few years in between when we didn't cover it, and now we've started again. So in this way, right now we are in the Bai Yi chapter, mainly discussing tradition and the relationships of inheritance among people. This is still very important. No two people are exactly the same. Everyone has their own individual level, their own unique capabilities, their own rank or position. If these levels become confused, others will find it laughable, and you yourself won't understand these matters either. Others will see such a person's behavior as erratic or crazy. So generally, people with wisdom, not to mention their understanding of all the principles of Buddhism, are also very well versed in worldly matters. So now we continue discussing. When the master entered the grand ancestral temple, he asked about everything. Someone said, "Who says the son of a man from Zhu understands ritual propriety?" When he entered the grand temple, he asked about everything. When the master heard this, he said, "This is the proper ritual." Here the main point is, when the master entered the grand temple, the master refers to Confucius. Once Confucius went to the grand temple. The grand temple at that time was the highest level temple in the country. Indeed, it should have been the most prestigious and revered place for conducting important rituals and ceremonies. It's roughly equivalent to today's temples or monasteries, so it's quite similar in that regard, because the place where Confucius was born, his actual hometown, is what is now Chufu. There are also some grand temples in Chufu. Nowadays, some Confucian temples are widely said to be, apart from the Forbidden City, the most magnificent and historically significant architectural complexes in China. Except for the Forbidden City, their scale shouldn't be small at all. There are even temples now that are second only to the Forbidden City in size. So the meaning here is that when Confucius went to the grand temple at that time, when he went, he asked about everything. He would ask about every aspect inside these temples, including all the intricate rituals, the profound doctrines, the magnificent architecture, every meticulous procedure, and every foundational rule that governs its operation. He would inquire about all these things in great detail. Some people, after coming in, would ask about everything. Actually, asking questions is very important. He asked a great many questions. At this point, it is said that some people remarked, some people apparently spoke in a rather sarcastic tone, saying, "Who truly says the son of a man from Zhu genuinely understands ritual?" As for the significant phrase, "who truly says," some people said it referred to the people of Zhu. The people of Zhu. He was someone from the land of Zhu. In other words, Zhu refers to apparently the place where Confucius's father was from. His father was called Shu Liang He or something like that. That was the situation at the time. So he was a person from Zhu. The son of a man from Zhu refers to Confucius. So it's not just saying the people of Zhu, but rather it's referring to Confucius of the Zhu family. After arriving at the ancestral temple, he asked about this and that. So in this case, does this mean that Confucius might not actually understand the rites? Because many of the questions he just asked were related to the system of rituals and etiquette. So people would say, isn't Confucius of the Zhu family supposed to be very knowledgeable? But when he entered the temple, he asked so many questions. If he asked so many questions, does Confucius really understand the rites or not? They had this kind of doubt. And what was the reason for this? Upon entering the ancestral temple, he asked about everything, because after entering the ancestral temple, he asked in detail about every matter, every building, every rule, every regulation. He inquired thoroughly about all of them. So does this mean he actually understands or not? If he raised such questions, does he truly and genuinely understand or not? This kind of talk, these sorts of discussions, eventually reached the ears of Confucius, the revered sage. So after Confucius heard about this, he said, "This is the right." When he responded, he did so very tactfully, saying, "This is a ritual." The matter he was asking about, this is a kind of ritual system. He didn't say, if we do such and such, for example, when a Khenpo or a Geshe goes somewhere to teach the Dharma and asks this, asks that, do they really understand this or not? For example, if we hear someone studies Madhyamaka and is a disciple of a certain Madhyamaka teacher, then this teacher's disciple goes around asking about Madhyamaka matters everywhere. Do they actually understand Madhyamaka or not? We might immediately get upset. Whether I understand Madhyamaka or not, what does it have to do with you? We might feel unhappy about it, something like that. But Confucius did not show any dissatisfaction, nor did he display any anger or anything like that. Instead, he responded in a completely different way. This is a matter of proper etiquette. So what did he mean by this? Actually, in this particular passage here, we can see that many later scholars in the process of analyzing it have also offered different interpretations. Some people say that indeed, when Confucius went to the ancestral temple for the first time, there were probably some rules he didn't quite understand. Just like nowadays, some people in the secular world, including some religious and Buddhist experts, theoretically they might know a bit about it. But when they actually go to a monastery, when it comes to Buddhist rituals, procedures and rules, many of them don't really understand much. So if they ask a lot of questions, that's actually quite normal. He really didn't understand some of the rules and sacrificial rites in the temple. He wasn't very familiar with these things. So even for Confucius, he probably still needed to keep learning. That's why to know what you know and to admit what you don't know. If there was something he didn't understand, he wouldn't pretend to know. Nowadays, some scholars, even though they clearly don't know something themselves, they feel embarrassed in front of others. So they might pretend, putting on an act as if they understand the rules. But in reality, that's not the case for Confucius. He still really don't understand some of the rules in the temple. So every time he went there, he would ask about every single thing in great detail. This is one way to interpret it. There's also another way to interpret it. As the revered founding figure of ritual and proper conduct in the ancient land of propriety, Confucius was completely knowledgeable. His wisdom, passed down through generations, was incredibly broad and erudite. He was a man of vast learning. There was nothing he didn't understand. But perhaps in front of others, from our perspective, for the sake of convenience, even though he understood these things, he was still someone who would consistently put on the outward appearance of always maintaining a facade, a rather devout and humble person. And then he would ask about every detail. He actually understood, but would ask knowingly. This is also one way of looking at it. There are also people who say that perhaps Confucius understood part of it, but there were some things he didn't quite understand. So when he went to ask, the wisdom he had acquired could be further confirmed and validated by asking repeatedly to verify the wisdom he had realized for himself and the states of understanding he had attained. So some say that Confucius didn't understand. Some say he understood completely. And some say he understood only partially, just a little bit. Actually, if people today try to explain it, they can say whatever they want. It seems like this term is rather simple, and every time I want to say a bit more about it. But after looking and thinking about it, it seems there is actually a lot to talk about within it. So this is something we need to understand. No matter when, in the future, or at any given time, wherever we go, asking insightful and relevant questions is still a very important and crucial aspect of effective communication, in my recollection of the time gone by. I also talked about this. One of the characteristics of His Holiness was that no matter where he went, he would ask questions. No matter what the situation was, sometimes when visiting the Guru in the morning, he would frequently and consistently inquire if there was anything at all happening or occurring. If you informed him that there was absolutely no new information or developments to report, then he would, without fail, proceed to ask if there was any older, previously known news that could be shared or discussed. If we answered, he would ask about everything. He would ask what the rules were here, what our schedule is for the next few days. He would ask about the local customs and traditions here. He would ask all sorts of questions. In fact, asking questions is the choice of a wise person. If you don't ask anything, there are some things you might not necessarily know. If you don't know, then wherever you go, it seems like some people, wherever they go, they're just like, huh? What? I don't know. Moshi moshi. They don't understand anything at all. It's like being stuffed inside a bag. When they come back, they're still clueless about everything. They don't understand anything. All they know is where to go eat. This even includes some of our Khenpos and Khenmos. When some of them go to give teachings or lectures, they must first understand the other party's rules and circumstances. They also ask about these things. Sometimes sometimes when I go out, for example, if I have to give a lecture here and another one there, and there's really no way to prepare on the road when I arrive there. Once I went to several schools and really couldn't manage to arrange things. In the end, when there was really no other way, on the way from the airport to the school, they arranged for someone who was quite familiar with things to accompany me. During the 1-hour drive from the airport to the destination, I asked him a lot of questions over and over again. When I got there, though it seemed I hadn't prepared, I still had a general understanding of the situation. Speaking based on that was actually very useful. So we really must, especially, for example, if you're going somewhere to give a speech and you know nothing when you go to give the speech, you might end up saying something embarrassing when you get there. So you really need to know all this in advance. For instance, for this event, about how many people are attending, what the general level of these people is, why the organizers are holding this event, what the purpose of the event is, whether it has been held before, and if so, whether there are plans to continue holding it in the future, or among the participants, what their general backgrounds are, and so on. If you ask these kinds of questions, then during the whole process of interaction, you'll probably have a relatively rich experience yourself. This is also very important. It seems that in the past, in the Book of Rites, it was also mentioned, when entering a region, ask about its taboos. When entering a country, ask about its customs. When entering a household, ask about its taboos. If we enter a place, we must understand what taboos there are, what things are not allowed. These should be asked about first. If you go to a country, the country's traditions, habits, and customs, these are things you should ask about. If you enter a household, you should find out if there are any taboos in that family. So sometimes when we encounter some journalists, especially well-known journalists, they will first say, now that I'm here, is there anything I shouldn't ask you about? They might start the conversation this way. If I say, there's nothing you can't ask, then they might ask you about anything and everything. Whether it's challenging you or just asking questions, they'll do so. So in our daily lives, of course, during our interactions, we need to learn to ask each other questions. Asking questions is indeed very important. Sakya Pandita also said this. If a wise person does not engage in questioning or debate, there's no way to know how much wisdom they actually possess. If we have a drum, but never strike it with a mallet, we have no way of knowing. It's only when we beat the drum that we find out, bang, 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 bang. Wow, this is different from our bottle. It has this quality. It's a drum, and no matter what kind of drum it is, we should be able to tell. So asking questions in our daily lives is still very much important. Socrates also famously said, asking insightful questions is truly the beginning of all wisdom. If we want to unlock this kind of wisdom, we should start by asking each other questions. I see that some of us here, during the process of tutoring, sometimes are able to ask questions, because now some of you may have gotten used to starting debates in Tibetan, but when it comes to debating in Tibetan, I also made a suggestion the other day, it's best to debate in the debate courtyard. Here, we should use Chinese for discussions. Here, it's better to focus on discussion. Speak less Tibetan here. There's definitely no problem with Tibetan itself for the people here. So as we continue learning, raise some questions. If Confucius had this kind of characteristic, it would be a bit different from others. Unlike others, he liked to ask questions. Now take Elon Musk, for example. He was also involved in the founding of the rocket company. Many experts discussed things with each other, and during the process of discussion, they kept asking questions. After asking, they made many discoveries. So many people around the world in high-end fields, when forming rocket teams, it is said that this is also related to that. So we should still raise questions. This is very important. I hope everyone becomes good at asking questions. Of course, when asking questions, it's not to show off your own intelligence. There's no need to ask questions in that way, nor should it be to disparage others. There's no need to ask questions like that either. But if you truly have a sincere heart and genuinely want to find the answer, then asking questions in this way is also very important. So this is a characteristic that Confucius had. At first glance, it may seem like a very ordinary statement, but in reality, we really do need to ask important questions like this. This is a very significant and crucial point to consider. In the past, when we went out, we might have needed to ask questions. I often think nowadays, on the one hand, it's still fine to ask questions, but if that really doesn't work, now we can search online. Of course, the answers you get online can be true or false. But regardless, this is also a way of learning. Nowadays, many people, if they don't recognize a character, they'll look it up online. If they don't know where to go or what good food there is, they'll check online. If they're looking for fun places to go, they'll search online too. A lot of people do this nowadays. Actually, this is also a convenient way to unlock wisdom. It might look like people are just always on their phones or computers, but in reality, when it comes to learning, it's really convenient now. So in the past, if we went out, we'd be afraid the teacher would ask us something, so we'd go around asking people for information. But sometimes, even after asking around, we couldn't find out anything. And sometimes the information we did get wasn't even accurate. That happened too. So back then, I often think if we had had a cell phone back then and could look things up online, it would have been something really delightful. But that era for people like us has already passed. As for your generation in the future, wherever you go, if you meet someone who is wise, even if it's just for a short time, and you spend some time with them or share a meal together, you'll gain a lot. The other person will also gain a lot from it. But if the person isn't wise, then there's not much to gain. Other than the food itself, there probably won't be much meaningful communication either. If someone is filled with greed, anger, ignorance, or arrogance, then even during a meal together, they might just talk about this person's faults or that person's shortcomings. Wow, after you finish the meal, you've ended up hearing a whole bunch of wrong views. When you go home, you realize, oh, I used to be like this. And it just leaves you feeling really uncomfortable inside. So when it comes to interacting with people, this kind of wisdom is important. There really is a big difference. Next, let's talk about the following. Confucius said, if the arrow does not pierce the target's leather, it is because the strength is not the same. This was the way of the ancients. Here, it's Confucius himself speaking. The Analects doesn't really follow a strict structure. Sometimes it says the master said, sometimes others are asking questions. It's a rather casual, free-form prose. Confucius said, if the arrow does not pierce the leather, it's because the strength is different. That's what Confucius said at the time. Here, shooting refers to archery. If it doesn't pierce the leather refers to the leather target you're shooting at in archery. A leather target, that's the object being aimed at. In other words, it's the object of focus, the target. Because in ancient culture, as everyone knows, the etiquette of archery, the rituals around archery were highly valued. So generally speaking, in the early days, when they practiced archery, if someone was very strong in archery, whether it was to strike an enemy or to shoot at game animals for sport or sustenance, they would gain a lot from it. So for the ancients, when it came to archery, the more accurate and powerful the shot, if the arrow could pierce straight through the leather target. That was considered very impressive. That's how they measured it. That was the way it was in the culture of that time. But Confucius advocated that archery is fine, but when it comes to archery, what is not necessary? It's not necessary to pierce the external leather target. It doesn't have to go all the way through. This applies to anything else you do as well, like tigers, lions, or bears. If you can hit them accurately, then you can pierce through them. But if it's a target made of leather, only someone with enough strength could shoot an arrow all the way through it. For others, it would be quite difficult, because at that time, the general rule was that if you were really skilled at archery, you had to pierce the target. That was the standard. But Confucius had a slightly different view. He said that when it comes to archery, it's actually a matter of culture. Everyone should have the opportunity to participate, so not everyone necessarily has to pierce the target completely. Why is that the case? Because people's individual strengths are not always the same. Indeed, everyone is truly different. Their abilities and levels are all different. Even though everyone has different levels of strength, this was the rule set by the ancients. It was part of the ancient rites and moral code. So what he meant was, even though people set rules, even though they establish systems, it's just like when we take exams. When we take exams, there's a certain score that's considered the best. But according to Confucius, just participating in the exam is enough. You don't necessarily have to do exceptionally well. Sometimes on the day of the exam, you might have bad luck, like a headache, or you're in a bad mood, or there could be all sorts of situations. So if you don't do well this time, it doesn't necessarily mean that person is bad. Back when we were studying in Ganzi, there were about 40 or 50 of us. At that time in our class, there was one student. He was the weakest, the worst one. He didn't have much ability, and in every aspect, his conditions were poor. He was probably the worst in our whole class. In every way, his grades weren't very good either. Then a few years ago, in 2016, we had a class reunion. It was a reunion after 30 years. At the reunion 30 years later, we found out, because now if you look at their ranks in society, like bureau chief, section chief, county chief, if you judge by those ranks, it turned out that the one who was the worst back then is now the highest ranking, and no one else could compare to him. Back then, he was also quite tall, and even those who were very knowledgeable and capable couldn't match him. Because he had that kind of status and wealth in every aspect, everyone still recognized and accepted him. So sometimes for us people, if we really measure by the same standard, it actually might not be accurate. For example, when it comes to archery, some people are weaker. They might not be able to shoot through the target. Some might not even be accurate with their shots, because everyone's strength and abilities and their training are all different, right? But according to Confucius, he believed that as long as you participate, when the time is right, your training might bear fruit when the conditions are ripe. Honestly, maybe it's because I often observe these things that even when we were studying, I would worry about those who excelled too much in their studies. If someone is very arrogant, can they really persist and see things through from start to finish in the future? And those who don't do well in their studies, maybe they'll become really impressive in the future. So about 20 years ago, after our classes, we encouraged everyone to blossom everywhere so that everyone would have the chance to shine. Otherwise, according to our old tradition, I would give a talk, and then the main teaching assistant would speak, then the senior assistant would speak, and then after that, there would be some people who, because they're not very eloquent and their speaking skills aren't great, so what they say doesn't come across very well, then they would never have the chance to speak at all. That's why we wanted everyone to have at least some opportunity, more or less. Every day, everyone accumulates experience bit by bit over time, and gradually, little by little, many people are able to develop their own potential. Someone who seemed really impressive at the time might not actually be that impressive, and someone who seemed not so great at the time, when they end up in different places later on, it still turns out to be very meaningful. So in including some things that happened to us last year, even if we couldn't flourish everywhere within that environment. I personally feel that in many other places, we could still flourish everywhere. Because over the course of many years, 10, even 20 years like that, every time just talking a little bit each day, in this way, it seems that gradually, little by little, by the time later on comes, many people's wisdom has grown. So even when leaving this place, at that time one might feel on one hand a bit reluctant and a bit unwilling to go. But for a great many people, it absolutely should be the case. An opportunity for them to participate themselves gradually in different places. It should have an effect, at least that's the idea. So as for us now, it's indeed the same in the world at large. Everything is judged by a single standard. Whether something is good or bad is determined by scores. Those with high scores are considered good people. And if the score is relatively low, even if their morals are good and their character is excellent and they're outstanding in every way, still everyone is judged because there is only one standard. This includes some companies nowadays as well. For them, they also have only one measure. They measure each person's work output. If you reach that standard, you're considered a good employee. If you don't meet it, then you're not considered good. Of course, there are some people who go way too far, and that's definitely unacceptable. But for everyone else, there's just this one metric for evaluation. If you don't meet it, then it's not acceptable. This morning, during our meeting, I also spoke with the nuns over there and discussed a few things with several Khenpos, because they set a standard, and not even a little bit below that is allowed. I said, when we do any kind of management, these things, maybe one aspect is the system and the other is humanization. Combining these two gives you both rigidity and flexibility. That's a bit better. Otherwise, if we handle everything strictly according to the system, some things will lack flexibility. And if we do everything purely based on our own imagination, that's not acceptable either. So having a system that is also humanized, that's very important. So in our current society, although Confucius didn't say it directly, he was actually talking about the issue of archery at the time. But in fact, this matter of archery, if we apply it to all aspects of our lives today, it still works. For example, nowadays, a lot of people, what do they value the most? It's mainly about being popular. Their click-through rate is very high, that's the main thing. But if the click-through rate is high, we don't really know what methods they're using to achieve that. The main thing is that people need to feel respected. And in this process, when everyone is saying this person is amazing, we still tend to have some doubts. And when everyone says this person is terrible, it doesn't necessarily mean they're actually bad. We might have a certain, whether it's Confucius' true philosophy or his particular sense of meaning, it's a more comprehensive way of looking at things. Whether it's about being a person or doing things, if we measure everything by a single standard, there will definitely be some difficulties. So here, what I'm saying is, archery, not every arrow need pierce the target. You all say every shot should pierce through, but that's not necessarily the case. As everyone has different strengths, you can't expect to always hit that goal. That's just impossible. Everyone wants to get a perfect score of 120, but that's just not realistic. Everyone's situation is different. So the primary and most crucial aspect to consider is how to effectively achieve a harmonious balance in various elements, specifically from the overarching perspective of generating and sustaining long-term value for all stakeholders involved. That's the idea here. Next, it says, Zigong wanted to abolish the sacrificial sheep for the announcement of the new moon. Confucius said, Zigong, you care about the sheep, but I care about the ritual. As for Zigong, he wanted to. Wanted here means intended to, and abolish means to get rid of or do away with. So what exactly was it that Zigong wanted to abolish? It was the practice of offering the sacrificial sheep, a long-standing ritual used for the important announcement of the new moon. In the state of Liu, there was a rule at the time. What was this rule? On the first day of every month, they had to slaughter a live sheep. This sheep was used for a sacrificial ceremony, praying for national peace and prosperity, something like that. Before this, for example, every single month, the principal ruler would regularly hold an important meeting with all the subordinate leaders, kind of like what we now call regular meetings, weekly meetings or annual meetings. Every single month, they would regularly gather together for an important meeting. Before this significant meeting, the esteemed officials from each distinct region invariably had to solemnly go to their revered official ancestral temple to perform this kind of sacrificial ritual, offering flesh and blood. This was quite a frightening practice. In this regard, Confucius didn't do very well. What deserves criticism should be criticized, and what deserves praise should be praised. Originally, this was the established rule. As for Zigong, he was more compassionate. He felt that many of the original rules from the Zhou dynasty were already gone. Now it seems like none of the other rules really remain. Every month, they would go there to perform the sacrificial rites. But this didn't seem to have much real significance. At that time, his values were mainly that it was a bit wasteful. Because Zigong, sometimes he still had a bit of that feeling. He thought that formalism was unnecessary too. Perhaps by the time of Confucius, most of the earlier Zhou rituals had already been lost, and there were no rules left. Maybe only the rule of slaughtering sheep remained. There really weren't many other rules left. He thought, we might as well just abolish this. This sheep sacrifice didn't have much meaning either. Wasting a sheep like this was unnecessary. But at this point, Confucius said, "Tsai, you care about the sheep, but this shouldn't be abolished. It should continue. It must be kept." And why is that? Array means what you love. You care about the sheep, I care about the ritual. You're worried that every week or every month sacrificing a sheep is a bit wasteful. Of course, they weren't like us in Mahayana Buddhism, thinking that the life of a goat is precious and pitiable. They definitely didn't consider things from that perspective, nor did Zigong. He was just afraid of waste. However, at this precise moment, the wise Confucius thoughtfully said, "Let us all try our absolute best to succeed. If we want this tradition to continue to be upheld, then we should keep it going. You care about not wasting a sheep, but I worry about losing this ritual. So we should preserve as much as we can. This important task must still be carried on and completed." That's the idea. So, regarding this particular matter, actually, how exactly should I put it, or perhaps phrase it, whether it's the country or their customs? There used to be certain rules. These rules, although they may seem, for example, like killing sheep, or, at this present moment, as a governmental body, they also have a certain set of established regulations and guidelines. However, these particular rules, in actual fact, some of them aren't genuinely or truly significant or critically important in the grand scheme of things. So at that time, Zigong really wanted to abolish them. But Confucius was quite reluctant. The primary reason for his reluctance was that he deeply felt that this kind of form was still very important. Here, from the perspective of us as Buddhists, we can clearly see and understand Confucius did not truly, genuinely value the lives of other sentient beings, such as animals. If he had put a stop to it at the time, then the nationwide monthly evil act of killing sheep would have ended. But Confucius did not do so. Although Confucius himself said, "Do not impose on others what you do not desire yourself." That's what he said. But this statement was entirely directed at humans. For people, if you yourself don't like killing, others feel the same way. They also don't want to be killed. But when it comes to sheep, he didn't have that kind of compassion. So from a certain perspective within Confucianism, it's not like Mahayana Buddhism, which has love and compassion for all sentient beings. He would even rather not abandon ritual propriety, but was willing to give up the lives of other sentient beings. So in this respect, there are some differences compared to our Buddhism. There may be some aspects that are not the same, because Confucian culture, in fact, if we look at its true rule, has lasted for more than 2,000 years now. During this process, it was mainly for the rulers to ensure that their subordinates and the common people would obey them. Apart from this, perhaps when it comes to the lives of sentient beings, it didn't really pay any particular attention to them at all, you see. That's one aspect. And there's another aspect as well. From another positive perspective, he felt it was better to give up certain other possessions or allow some waste, but that the rules themselves were very important. Not giving up on these rules was also very important. If we understand it from this perspective, for example, in our Buddhism, sometimes there may be no study, contemplation, or practice at all. And in the monastery, it's just reciting scriptures, making offerings, or performing ritual ceremonies. Some people might say about these things, it would be better if these didn't exist. But that's not really the case. Essential study, contemplation, practice might be missing, but scripture, recitation, prostration in monasteries, circumambulation, stupas, these too are part of the history of Buddhism, a traditional and deeply rooted culture within Buddhism. If this profound culture truly exists, then it also serves as a vessel for Buddhist culture. Sometimes we go too far. And when we go too far, we lack the highest level of understanding and think that these basic things are unnecessary. Especially now, some people who have just started studying, contemplating, and practicing, the Khenpos who have just come out of the academies especially like to say this, you ritual masters who go to lay people's homes to recite scriptures, there's no real meaning in that. They start saying things like this. But actually that's not right either. It seems that Master Uyi, when discussing the Ksitikarpa Sutra or something similar, also mentioned this at the time, didn't he? In fact, it's also stated in the sutra itself. In a degenerate age, for example, if a monastic shaves their head and beard, wears robes and so on, even if he does not maintain pure precepts in his continuum, he still represents the image of Buddhism. His merit is extremely great. The 10-Wheel Sutra of Ksitikarpa explains this. So sometimes we are rather excessive too. You might as well not be here at all, that would be better. This dilapidated temple doesn't even have anyone teaching the Dharma inside. All you do is recite scriptures, just beating gongs and drums. What exactly is the point of that? This is also a kind of excessive amount. For example, take our current Tibetan culture. Tibetan traditional clothing, in some remote places now is only worn during special ceremonies and significant cultural events. Like at weddings or during the New Year, that's when people start to wear them. But some people say, it would be better if we didn't have this at all. But maybe that's not the case. Even if there's just a little bit left at that time, because many other traditions are already gone. Confucius meant that much has disappeared, yet it looks tragic. But at that point, as long as there's even a little bit left, that's still acceptable. Our current Tibetan culture, including clothing culture, and food culture, as well as many traditional cultures in monasteries, are gradually, bit by bit, becoming like in Confucius's era, from the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties all the way down. Things have been getting worse and worse. But when there's still a little left, we should persist and keep it going. This is still very important. Even if it's just a little, we must persist. This also applies to our attitude toward the academy. Sometimes all kinds of things happen as well. Whether it's issues concerning the monastics or matters related to buildings or even cultural impacts. Although these challenges keep coming, in the process of facing these challenges, we also strive for a little bit, just like the offering I brought that day, even if we can only gain a little. That's still a kind of achievement, right? Even if it's just a little, that's fine too, right? If it doesn't work here, we can go somewhere else, right? If we can't get the offering here, we can get the offering somewhere else. So when I mentioned it that day, now every time they bring out the offering,
everyone looks at me with a very strange and peculiar expression. Many people think, I really do genuinely care a lot about this particular offering.
Confucius also said, killing the sheep doesn't matter. As long as the ritual is passed down, it's fine. So for us, in everyone's future life, it is essential to consider many things will change. When things change, if you can't get the best, then settle for the middle. If you can't get the middle, then the lowest. Even if you can only get a little symbolic thing. We shouldn't lose confidence, just keep working hard. I remember what the previous guru, the wish-fulfilling jewel, said, and indeed there are many things that are like this, because the guru was someone who came from a very special era. So among the things we encounter here, there may be even more, and even harder challenges than that. But he always persevered. So for each of us, in the years to come, there may also be some personal difficulties, as well as collective difficulties. At such times, we should do our best to strive for certain things. Whether it's tradition or lineage, including the knowledge we personally need, we should try our best to pursue them. That is the meaning here. Confucius said, "To serve one's lord with utmost propriety is often seen by others as flattery." Next it says, here Confucius said, which is also a saying of Confucius, "To serve one's lord with utmost propriety. When serving your own ruler, you should actually be extremely respectful and reverent. You should follow a complete set of proper etiquette and rules and do your best to carry them out. But in the process of doing so, people may think it is flattery. Because at that time, Confucius himself was not, let's say, the ruler of Liu State, but later he was called, the Grand Minister of Justice, right? He was a high-ranking official, after all, a senior official in charge of legal affairs. But he was someone who really understood proper conduct. He was very respectful toward his superiors. Whenever Confucius met with his superiors, he was always extremely respectful and reverent. He followed every single rule and custom passed down from his predecessors, not missing a single one. He knew them all. Whether it was bowing in respect or showing proper reverence or serving his superiors as required, he would do all of these things. But in the process of doing so, some people in society at the time began to mock Confucius, saying that he was very sycophantic, that he liked to flatter and curry favor with his superiors. It's the same even nowadays, isn't it? These days, if someone shows even a little respect to their boss or to people in higher positions, if they're just a bit polite or observe some etiquette, then people below them will say, look, he wants to move up, he has an agenda. Even if some people don't say it out loud, they start pointing, especially with their eyes. There are all kinds of people like that, right? Confucius was the same way. When he himself started showing more respect to his superiors, when he became more reverent. Our academy is actually a bit better in this regard. But in some other monasteries, there are all sorts of situations like this. Whenever someone does even a small good deed, everyone talks about it behind their back. But when someone does something bad, everyone is happy about it, as if it's nothing. Sometimes people themselves don't even know why they're like this. That's how it is. So at that time, Confucius felt, how should I put it, when he showed such respect to his leaders, when he served them in this way, everyone else started talking about him. They mocked him, kept talking about him. But in fact, what Confucius meant was that it shouldn't be like this. If, from a personal perspective, someone wants to get promoted, wants to gain some material benefit or fame, and so deliberately flatters others with an agenda, then that is indeed not good. But in a certain sense, doing this is also correct. For example, generally speaking, in Buddhist tradition, having respect for one's teacher and having a certain respect for those above you, if that's the case. This isn't about age nor about any particular position. I must show respect. Our institute is like this now, isn't it? As for the institute, after the passing of His Holiness in the first 3 years, everyone supported it together. Later we took turns, having some Khenpos and Khenmos take the lead, to manage the entire institute during the management process. There were some young people involved, as well as some older people. But no matter what, if someone held that position for a year, the rest of us would still show great respect and listen to what they said. Actually, this isn't about currying favor or trying to please someone. It's not like that. This is simply a kind of rule and way of conduct for people. So there's no need for us to think, if you listen to him, you're weak, or that you have all sorts of motives. It's not like that. It's not about seeking some personal gain. That's not what it is. Next, let's talk about this. Duke Ding asked, how should a ruler treat his ministers, and how should ministers serve their ruler? Confucius replied, a ruler should treat his ministers with propriety, and ministers should serve their ruler with loyalty. So, regarding Duke Ding's question, he was a ruler of the state of Liu, right? It seems he was a fairly high-ranking official, maybe even higher than Confucius, or something like that. A person of that status. He asked about the relationship between ruler and minister, king and court official. Actually, here it doesn't necessarily refer to an actual king and his ministers. But the meaning is similar. It's about those in higher positions and those in lower positions. We can understand it this way. So when people in higher positions employ those below them, how should they treat those in lower positions? And for those in lower positions, how should they serve the ruler above them? What should they do? How should those above treat those below? And how should those below treat those above? That's the kind of question being asked here. Confucius replied, usually it's Confucius said, but here when Confucius replies, he shows a bit of respect toward the other person, or perhaps he treats him as an equal, or maybe even as someone of higher status. So when he responds, how does he answer? A ruler employs his ministers with propriety. So when a ruler wants to employ those below him, he must do so with propriety. Not simply by relying on his own authority, not by just giving orders and demanding obedience. It's not like that. He should act within the bounds of proper etiquette, for example, with fairness, reason, and care. This is the way to treat those below. It's not about using power to oppress you from the start. You must do this, or else I'll fire you, I'll dismiss you. It shouldn't be like that. Nowadays, even those with a little bit of authority, when they're dissatisfied with their subordinates, only have one thing to say. If you really won't listen, then get out. You're fired. This kind of approach is really unreasonable. There should be a sense of understanding and care in how you treat them. And then when a minister deals with his superior, the minister should also be loyal when dealing with those above. It's not about pretending to be respectful just for the sake of your own future or livelihood. It's not about faking respect when you don't actually feel it. That's not how it should be. You should be genuinely sincere and loyal from the heart. Why should it be this way for both sides? Actually, what this means is that if those above truly treat those below well, treating them as people, as human beings, then those below, in turn, after all, he is a person too. He will also be very loyal to those above him. This is a natural law. This is very important. So when we employ people, it's true that we shouldn't elevate our own position too high, thinking, I am the leader, as if we've become someone above everyone else. We often say, don't we, that it's as if inside our body there's a wooden stick propping us up, making it impossible to bend down at all. It shouldn't be like that. We should be humble on the one hand. And on the other hand, when dealing with people, those who are good at employing people put themselves below others. This is what Lao Tzu said in the past. He said that if we truly want to be a leader, we shouldn't be too arrogant ourselves. We should remain relatively humble. If we do this, things will go much better. Only in this way can we do our work well as a whole. It's the same in our world as well. But nowadays, it's very difficult. Generally, since the beginning of Western Han culture, many rulers basically have used Confucian thought as their political tool, so the monarch above holds great power. If someone is disobedient or something like that, they are basically dealt with by punishing them in another way. After being punished, the other party has no recourse. This is the way it works. These particular rules are quite strict and must be followed. Actually, this approach is not very good. As a monarch, for example, if I am a person in charge, if I am a monarch, I should treat my subordinates well if I want to use them, and then make use of their wisdom. This is the best way. Back when we were studying, there was a teacher Liu who often told us stories about Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Dream of the Red Chamber, and Water Margin. He wouldn't teach the required school lessons, nor would he prepare for class. But this was a bit of a problem for us. On one hand, because of the school's unified exams, when it came time for the tests, we hadn't really studied, so we couldn't pass. But on the other hand, we really enjoyed listening to his classes. Every time he came in, he would say, "Today I'll tell you about Dream of the Red Chamber. Today I'll tell you about Romance of the Three Kingdoms." He talked about Liu Bei, saying Liu Bei was wise, but his own abilities were rather weak. Later, when he wanted to take over Shu, which is the area around present-day Sichuan, in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, there are three kingdoms. In the story, Liu Bei wanted to take over Shu, but he really couldn't do it on his own. However, he was very good at employing talented people, so he went to seek out Zhuge Liang. Zhuge Liang was extremely wise. He was exceptionally talented in every aspect. At that time, it was as if he was living in seclusion, like being in retreat. He just stayed there all the time. Meanwhile, Liu Bei kept pleading outside. Twice, he was refused. Zhuge Liang said, "I'm not coming down the mountain. I'm not going to be your advisor or help you in battle." He said, "I don't want to get involved in this." Then, one winter day, Liu Bei didn't dare disturb him again. Originally, Liu Bei was the ruler, the one in the higher position. Zhuge Liang was the subordinate. But there he was, almost like a snowman, pleading with him in the snow the whole time. Eventually, Zhuge Liang was moved by this. He thought, wow, if someone is pleading with me like this, and it's even a ruler, then I should agree to help him. So he began to offer him advice and strategies. He devoted himself wholeheartedly, working tirelessly until his death. He began to effectively use his profound wisdom and his exceptional skills and abilities. In the end, they did achieve victory. So people with wisdom, when they deal with their subordinates, if they truly have wisdom, they also treat them very well. And when the people below are moved by this, they also do their best for those above them. It's not always about following strict rules. You must do things this way. If you don't do it this way, then I'll treat you in such and such a manner. Sometimes that approach works, but sometimes it doesn't. So generally, Confucius's management philosophy, both those above and below should treat each other with compassion, with fairness, and with mutual loyalty. If that's the case, the things they do will be very successful. Otherwise, the overall results may not be very good or effective. So even now, including some of Confucius' profound and timeless ideas today, we can still find great relevance and wisdom in them. People apply them to business management and to facilitate group or team learning, and it is widely said to be very effective, not only in the East, but also in various other regions, but also in some groups in the West. Because some of these ideas are being borrowed, even though they are from over 2,000 years ago. Many people say these are the outdated ideas of Confucius, that they are useless. But in fact, if you really apply them today, the people of today may not be able to give you such good advice. So in our process of learning, if we can carry these principles forward, whether in managing our own monastic community or in spreading the Dharma and benefiting others, perhaps at times they are meaningful everywhere. All right, that's all for today.
Bandara Padma Sada Bandara Padma Sada